Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Fresh Perspectives with Launch SA. My name is Ryan. I'm the director of Launch SA, and today we have with us Karla Garza from Key Coworking. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Mostly just taking care of little stuff today.
Oh, that's exciting. Fun little note about Karla. Me and her used to be coworkers back in the day at what was then Cafe Commerce, which is now Launch SA. And so I know that you're sort of a data head in that you really, well, number one, you always helped us manage to our data points as, Launch SA, Cafe Commerce. But now you are, I guess you were always down the path of entrepreneurship, but you're now the owner of Key Coworking, which is located near the quarry and is focused on business to business co-working. And there's a lot within that probably needs to be unpacked, especially considering COVID-19 is making it pretty hard to do anything in person.
Yep.
But before we really get to the current environment, I always like to kind of really get to how did we get here. So I'd really love to get some insights on, what inspired you to be an entrepreneur? Did you always know you were going to be one? I know that you're fairly young, so this is kind of is it one of those things where you thought, hey, I'll take the risk while I'm young, and if it doesn't work out, there's probably some office job somewhere that'll take me, or give me the backstory.
So I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I picked Trinity specifically because it had an entrepreneurship program.
Okay.
So,
and that's Trinity University.
This goes back at least 10 years.
Okay.
Having said that, I am a fourth generation entrepreneur, which means the idea of some office job will take me kind of did not cross my mind. I had a support network that were pretty honest about talking about businesses that failed, businesses that succeeded, the fact that sometimes some of them do fail and you get up, you try again, you learn from the first time. I don't know where they got the statistic, and I don't know if it's true, but they always quoted 9 times out of 10 the first business fails, but 8 times out of 10 the second one succeeds. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's made up.
I'm always about anecdotal stuff, so I'll take it.
So that's kind of why. And then to answer what inspired me to make Key Coworking is there is a lot of industry-specific co-working spaces in San Antonio, or specific type of people, like creatives or women or stuff like that. I didn't see any that were addressing business to business, which makes up 80% of the market in San Antonio. And while they are a business, they do have somewhat different roles.
Okay.
Selling's not just posting on Facebook, it's a little different, stuff like that. I was like, we can help with that. The other thing was, and boy, did I miss the mark on that one. There's always a spike in entrepreneurship during a recession.
Okay.
So the goal was be open and be a safe landing spot by the time a recession hit, so that people could have a place to land and kind of get their feet under them.
Okay.
Did not see a pandemic coming. That was a curveball.
Yeah, that's definitely weird for sure. So how did you come to the conclusion that a co-working space was sort of the avenue of entrepreneurship for you? And then I have a couple other questions, so hopefully I'll remember them. Hopefully you'll remember them. So why co-working? Can you explain what business to business is? And I guess we'll start with those two, and then I'll go to the others.
So my very first job was in real estate, commercial. So I understand the importance that people attach to their physical space. I got to talk to the clients. they always talked about how some of them had tried to work from home and they didn't like it. So they were sitting in offices that were frankly much too large for them.
Okay.
Um, Two people in in a 1,000 square foot office. Some of them, some of the people who came in were looking for space because they didn't want to work from home,
Hmm.
but they also had that same issue. And these aren't your traditional coworkers.
Okay.
These aren't your tech people. These aren't your like 20-year-old startup person. These are like usually a bit older, usually in business to business, where they usually meet their clients at their office, at the client's office, not their own.
Hmm.
But they don't want to work from home, so that's kind of so I already had that in my mind, and then the concept of co-working became more and more prevalent. I was like, I think I can make the jump to educating these people about co-working and why it would fit their specific needs.
Okay.
Find some of the aspects around what they need instead of what other coworkers have. So business to business, I've mentioned this before, is a business whose primary clients are other businesses, not consumers.
Okay. That makes sense. So, I mean, you opened the business, is it about 2 years ago or is it three?
It's a year.
Oh, it's a year. Wow. I mean, I guess the pandemic makes everything feel longer, right? So,
Uh, we
uh,
we took a year to remodel.
oh, that's right. So you've been working on it for a good while. Um, I mean, that's really exciting. How do you feel it's gone so far? Like, I know you said that obviously the pandemic is one thing, but do you feel like you have made a dent? Do you feel like you're finding the clientele you were hoping for? What kind of journey has that been like?
We've definitely made a few pivots. We're still hitting the market of business to business. We've dropped it from our marketing
Okay.
because a lot of people who are business to business don't actually know what the term means. So we've pretty much dropped it from the marketing and then targeted audiences to business industries. So that really helped us find our people. We were starting to get a bit more traction, a lot more people coming in. Uh, we're still having people be interested, but a lot of the plans are when this is over.
I see. And so, in terms of that interest, I mean, really digging in and building on marketing, how have you recruited your people? Has it been mostly word of mouth? Have you spent money on SEO or advertising? Has it been grassroots? Are you doing like pop-up campaigns or guerrilla marketing or
Uh,
flash mobs or something?
I'm gonna be honest. I have no clue how our first client found this. He doesn't remember how he found this. He showed up before we opened. Uh, he just kind of showed up and was like, "Hey, I needed space." And he's one of those people with a personality where like you just like, okay, we're gonna run with this. I asked him about 3 weeks later how he found this. He's like, I don't know. I don't remember. It's like, damn it. This is useful info. This is like the one data point. But it is what it is. Most of it has been word of mouth, although we do spend on advertising. We do have a social media person. And it's usually like people find this through social media and then they tell other people, and then that person becomes their client. Is kind of how it's worked. A lot of our marketing is based around being helpful. So a lot of workshops, a lot of hey, here are some good resources. Here's who to talk to in the local community. Because I think I've mentioned this before. If it's someone's in the first month of starting out, we will help them, but it's more important that they get their feet under them before they start paying other people money.
Right.
So it's been a lot of getting to people in that stage. And
That makes
yeah,
sense. Okay. So when you think about, I'm going to step back even a little bit further. When you think about your journey to entrepreneurship, you mentioned you came from a family or multi-generational entrepreneur family. Um, has that business or those businesses mainly been in a real estate like thing, or has it been pretty diverse? I mean, what kind of lessons did you pick up to be successful? And I mean, success is sort of an open term. Let's not, it doesn't have to be millionaire, but hey, you've started, you've launched, you have customers, you're already successful in my book. In many ways, you're doing it. That's a huge step, right? Um, so, what did you learn? Why was this such an obvious route to you other than, hey, everyone I know is doing it or everyone I, related to is doing it? Does that help? Is that
I can go with that.
okay? Yeah.
Uh, so pretty diverse, everything from real estate to restaurants. Um, Mostly what I learned is there are some universal truths to entrepreneurship. Nearly everyone I've talked to has said if I knew how hard it was going to be, I wouldn't have done it. So I'm glad I didn't know. Is a pretty consistent feeling across people. The other one is people usually don't talk about the failures, but they happen a lot. Um, Entrepreneurship is mostly surviving them, so you can try something new the next day. Uh, but yeah, it's I guess for me the reason I started on this path is I look at an office job and I think in the past it was a pretty sure bet. You could just go into a job, stay there for 40 years, and you would get a pension, you would get a nice retirement, you could climb the ranks. Like, it was a pretty solid career path. Think in today's environment, how often people move and how often people get laid off or a company closes. That's no, like, you're taking on not the same level of risk because you're not risking your personal profits, but you're taking on a whole lot more risk as an employee now than you used to. And I think that's trade off is starting to make less and less sense for people, where you might as well make the money and just be the owner instead of trading that for the safety of, hey, I'm going to be here for 40 years.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense, and that's something that I personally echo 100%. I mean, it used to be that stability was, you could trust that a company would want to keep you for 40 years. Now, I mean, it's not like a company, I don't want to name names necessarily, but major companies that have been around for hundreds of years aren't necessarily looking to grow with more people. They're looking to trim the lines to create more value for more profits, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
how do you ensure that you have a livelihood? It's, in my mind, it's better to control that destiny yourself. And then, the other thing that I always kind of think of is, if you work an office job and that company goes under, you get fired. I mean, you're only as strong as the, 8 to 10 people around your core group and who they know. And if all you've been doing is working there, then you only know them and they probably only know you. So, not a whole lot of network to go off of there. So, but I think that's kind of a thing that co-working creates is a network, is a community.
Definitely
So
past
go
eight
ahead.
or 10 people. Even
In
as
in
an
terms
introvert,
of
you end up beating a much. So I remember being an employee and I met an entrepreneur. By necessity, you grow your network as an entrepreneur. Like, you have to, you need help from a legal standpoint because you need a lawyer, you need an accountant, you need an entrepreneur by definition needs massive networks of help. Whether it's like legal or like your marketing person or just like clients, friends, mentors, you actively have to grow it. As an employee, you can just kind of be more passive about it and just network with whoever is working with you.
mhm. So in terms of building your community, how have you been able to really support that growth of community and those, connections from business to business, or fostering those learning opportunities or that growth? I mean, can you speak a little bit about that?
For us, it's a lot of listening to what people are saying. If someone tells you, hey, because it's like, I don't understand Facebook, I'm having issues with like my social media is not working. Instead of waiting for them to be like, hey, do you know a marketing person? It's like you step up and you're like, hey, this coworker is a marketing person. Would you like to be introduced? Or it's making those connections, paying attention to what people are saying, asking them, hey, what needs do you think you're going to have in the next few months so we can make sure we have workshops lined up that work for you?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, More letting them lead. Like, community is about feeling supported. So, actively providing that support, making sure people get where they need to go, talk to the people they need to. Sometimes it's just an email every once in a while, be like, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? Which is something we did a lot while we were closed down during the first part of the pandemic, was just reach out to people and be like, hey, how are you doing? Do you need to talk? Even if it's just to rant or
Mm-hmm.
vent about how bad things are. Community is about support and about relationships, and relationships are built one step at a time through care and like actually showing people you care about them as a person and not a number. So
Yeah,
kind of poking my employees and be like, hey, how are they doing as people? Like, I know they pay rent on time this month, but how are they doing?
that's like, I think that's like the ultimate mantra that I kind of share is just, it's great that you're around, but really, how are you doing? Like, if that answer isn't good, or doesn't have an answer, I mean, then I feel like not necessarily burdened, but I definitely feel interested in trying to help someone figure that part out. And so that's kind of the marker of, I think, a true connector in that sense. So I think that the community you're creating is probably thriving pretty well based on that. But before I go too far, I want to see if my counterpart on the call here, the freshest perspective, our intern Taylor, might have any questions to help spur things that maybe we're overlooking or glancing upon. And we'll see if she jumps in.
Let me put my headphones on real quick. There's a little bit of noise.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So just jump in whenever you're ready. But so Karla, what would you say, just kind of as we're waiting for Taylor, what would you say has been the biggest learning, or I would say obstacle or thing that you've learned so far in being an entrepreneur?
So that there's two answers to the question. One's personal, one's business related.
Okay.
On a personal note, it's do what you can and set the rest of the problem aside to the next day. Staying up to 3 in the morning and worrying about something you can't do anything about till the next day doesn't actually do anything. It just makes you grumpy the next day.
Right.
Or it really makes me grumpy enough that not even coffee will fix it the next day. And as a business owner, there's always good times coming and there's always bad times coming. You need to plan to grow in the good and thrive in the bad. That's pretty much like, because there's been a lot of, like, if it's the biggest one, it's going to be the pandemic because that's the one that closed us down.
Right.
But there's so many other things that happened on the journey that happened even before the pandemic hit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, there's always good things coming. There's always bad things coming. Just
Okay.
get ready for both of them.
I do want to ask one thing before I pass it over to Taylor for a minute. So is there something that you practice or something that's helped you maintain that positive outlook? I know that for many people, it's very difficult to have a positive outlook on business and life, whatever. So, how do you keep that sanity, or how do you maintain focus on, this is just this is just a low time, but high times will come.
It's a combo of really good supportive friends, and as you pointed out at the beginning, I am a data person.
Yeah.
Earth has survived a pandemic before. We will do it again. We have and people came out stronger for it. So it's kind of a looking back at history and be like, okay, it's really bad. But all of history says it eventually gets somewhat better.
Yeah.
So taking a longer view instead of the more immediate view, it also helps with planning. Like what happens after the pandemic? What happens when people get used to work from home, but also need to get out of the house? So once you start looking at it like that, you start to see opportunities. And once you see those opportunities, it's a lot easier to be positive about the now. Because it's not a made up positivity. There is something to be positive about. It just, you might have to look out a few months instead of next week.
That makes sense. So now I'm going to pass it over to Taylor for the freshest of perspectives, because she has no background with you, Karla, except for what she's heard so far.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start off by asking, your company is a business to business company. So are there any unique challenges for B2B companies that don't always exist with B2C companies?
You've unlocked like the I can go on for about this for hours, but I'll give the short answer. Yes, there are a lot of differences. It's particularly with the selling process. Sometimes the person who wants to use the product is not the person who decides to make the product and is not the person who pays for the product or the service. Sometimes it's we'll sell to someone who's an insurance person who's mostly has clients inside the loop, but their office is on 1604, so they want a place to like crash between clients. But they're not the one paying for it, and they're not the one who has to approve it. That's usually their boss and whoever's making financial decisions. Sometimes it's the same person, sometimes it isn't. So it's a lot of doing that. It's also a lot more formal. There's a lot more contracts. People get really good at reading contracts and making invoices just because you have to, and sending it off to a lawyer every single time is not feasible. Like big contracts, get a lawyer. Small things, most people end up learning how to read them. It becomes a much more formal practice where there's a lot of things embedded in the culture which people expect you to know. That if you haven't worked in the industry, you wouldn't necessarily know, like memorandums of understanding, letters of intent, selling process, the fact that sometimes you render a service and it takes 30 days to get paid, which that's something I've worked with clients, is either putting in discounts or having deposits or just planning to not have that money for 30 days is something they might have to. Some of them have sell to bigger companies and they're looking at 90 days. That means you're getting paid for something you did 3 months ago. You have to figure out how you're going to live for 3 months without that money. So it is still fundamentally business. All the generals apply. It's more there's a culture and a sort of rules that people need to get good at in order to be able to work it well. Sometimes those things, they're small, usually only make that mistake once or twice. But when you're a baby company, though, that once or twice might be the last one. So
I guess what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs, specifically like B2B? Because I know that there are tons of resources, it seems like, for B2C entrepreneurs, but like that culture that you were mentioning doesn't really get talked about publicly all that often. So what advice would you give to those entrepreneurs?
One, if you can get a mentor who's in the industry, they don't need to be an entrepreneur, just even if it's just a salesperson or just someone in procurement. They can be an employee. Just get someone who's been in the industry who then can walk you through the hiccups. We can help out. We try to fill that role. But yeah, just find someone in the industry that you can be like, hey, I have a question. How do I do this?
Mm-hmm.
Google is your friend, although Google on this particular topic tends to get very technical and very specific very quickly. So it's not quite as useful as it is in other industries unless you know what you're looking for. The third one is if your client already knows you're one of their first clients, be honest with them. Be like, hey, first time around, this is why, like, I just want to go over the entire process with you, make sure we're both on the same page, which is honestly just going over everything is a good practice anyway. But yeah, that and if you're about to sign a contract and you don't understand something with it, 100% pay a lawyer. Like, just if there's something in the contract you don't understand, get a lawyer, especially if it's a big contract. It'll save you a lot of heartache because, yeah, I've had to sit down and read through 150-page contract and just highlight everything I don't understand. Just be like, hey, lawyer, explain this.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, if you spend a bit of time reading the contracts, it's only going to be maybe 3 or 4 things that you have questions about. And that usually only takes about an hour or two to explain. But it's gotten me out of some. Can I tell stories?
Please, yeah, tell it.
So I had a broker approach us with a client in hand who wanted about 4 of our offices. And I was looking through the contract he offered, super excited because, like, this was like within the first month we opened. I started looking through everything on the list, and there's a few things in there that I kind of understand don't really make sense, just because they're referring to certain statutes and certain limitations and certain waiving of rights. And I was like, I'm just gonna call the lawyer, and my lawyer, like, I send it over. I was like, hey, and 20 minutes in, like, not even 20 minutes after I send, he gives me a call. And he's like, so the first thing you ask for is he wants 20% of your revenue in perpetuity for all your clients, not just the ones he brought. It was like, don't sign this contract. He's like, I'm only going to charge you the 20 minutes because the advice is don't sign this. He's like, if you want to negotiate, because this guy might have just gotten this off the internet or might not know what's in it, I can help you out. So I called the guy and I was like, hey, my lawyer said this is what's in the contract. He's like, yes. I was like, okay. Are you willing to negotiate out of that position? He's like, no. Take it or leave. And I was like, okay, bye. But that was 20% of my revenue forever. And it may not have been enforceable in court. It still would have been hellishly expensive to fight it. And it cost me, what, $100 to avoid a multi-$1,000 mistake?
Mm-hmm.
So lawyers are expensive, but when you really don't know, they will get you out of some, like, they will stop you from getting into bad situations if you have a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's basically the advice is sometimes you have to spend the money on a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you have a pretty good grasp now of the complexities involved with like navigating the B2B like field, I guess. So how did you learn to navigate? Did you already have experience with B2B or did you kind of learn as you went?
So, like I said, my first job was in commercial real estate. So commercial real estate has a lot of it's basically exclusively B2B. As soon as you're looking at commercial property, your only clients are businesses. There's still some things that I learned by asking, but a lot of them were just kind of how things run in the real estate industry. You have letters of intent. It takes forever to get anything done when it comes to sales. Payments don't usually happen automatically, stuff like that. Some of it is actually, I had a really good accounting professor who spent about a week in the class hammering in the fact that net 30 and net 90 exist, and not just how they affect you from an accounting point of view. He was very practical in this is going to make it so you don't have money for 3 months. How are you going to fix that? Which is not something every accounting professor takes the time to point out. They just kind of go with like, hey, this is how you do accounting for net 30 and net 90, and then forget about it. And this guy was like, so this is how you do it, but these are the implications for your business.
So what are net 30 and net 90? Just like briefly, if you can.
They are accounting terms. They basically mean the accounts payable gets paid in 30 or 90 days. So if you're the person who's holding that account, like who's going to be receiving the money, it means they have 30 days to give you payment after the job's completed, or after whatever payment that you agreed on. Usually, like, it's very rare that you will get in business to business, you will get same day turnaround. Just because it's corporations, it takes a while for whoever made the purchase take the money down to procurement and get them, and then get accounting to send you a check.
Right.
So net 30 is probably the most common I've seen in San Antonio, but I've seen a few net 90s. But yeah, it's just how long are you going to wait before you see the money?
Okay, that makes sense. And that's an interesting like issue to have if you have like you're starting with one client and you do your job and it's going to be 30 days before you see the paycheck. So how do you and your business, like how have y'all been coping with that, especially during COVID-19?
So because we function as a landlord, there is a standard in the real estate industry of prepayment, which means we charge before the month goes in. Having said that, because of the pandemic, we've postponed and canceled a few payments, because I would rather have clients for the next year than a month of rent. But yeah, so I mentioned before that the goal was to be open before a recession. There were cash reserves in place for that. There are currently now not recession funds, they're now pandemic funds.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have a few clients who they were like, hey, I did this job. I usually get paid within a week, but it's net 90 and I don't think I'm going to see the money for 3 months. It's like, okay, pay me when you can. I trust you. Which there's been a lot of that, a lot of how are you really doing? Because none of us are doing okay.
Right. So how have you and your business been flexible, or even like seen flexibility or people adapting to the circumstances in COVID, like the people that you work with?
A few of my clients have 100% moved completely digitally, and it's actually helped them. The person I'm talking about makes websites. He started landing clients outside of San Antonio when he used to only network in person. A few other people have put together programs specifically for companies trying to manage COVID. like going fully digital, updating websites, the whole shebang. So they've pivoted that way. A few of them, myself included, have looked at like the life coaches, stuff like that. They've tried to do it online. The nature of it is it's harder because for first meetings they need to look at people's body language. So in person is somewhat essential to them. A few of us are like have pivoted away from growing the business into building reputations, creating evergreen content that can keep going afterwards. A lot of the things that are in the to-do list that keep getting pushed aside, because while they would make the company better, the payoff is far off in the future.
Mm.
So a lot of people, particularly for the first 2 months, took the time to do that. Update websites, overhaul systems, completely transfer one side to the other. One of our clients has a car dealership, and he took the first 2 months to look at how he was going to change, not just during the pandemic, but afterwards, how he sells cars and where he can offer better service and where he can cut stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a range of responses from, oh my god, I can open my market, to I'm going to build better foundations. We did have some people who made the decision they were just going to close down their business. Pretty quickly, they didn't see the end coming in the next 6 months and did not have the ability to survive those 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So they made the choice to close, which that is a fair but very hard decision to make.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing. I guess my final question that I have for you is if you could go back to the time right before you decided to take that plunge and start your own business, would you change anything?
Ryan's probably going to kill me for this one. I probably would have stayed at Lunch and Safe for another 6 months.
That's funny.
If I knew how long it was going to take to land the business and finish the remodel, I would have stayed longer. But I also think that if I hadn't taken the jump then, it would have taken even longer because there would have been no sense of urgency.
Yeah, that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
But like, if I could keep the timeline the same, I would have stayed at Launch to say a few months longer just because I didn't need to leave as quickly. But it's really hard to like, in the moment, when timelines are like still all hypothetical.
Right.
Look at someone and be like, you're going to run into all these issues. So just like get started, but don't leave.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I don't know how many food entrepreneurs I know. The example I like to give is Mike Miller. You remember Mike, right?
Yep.
Okay, so Mike Miller makes fermented foods. Excuse me. Makes fermented foods, and at the time when he started going through one of our programs, he was working in the oil field. And when you ask him, he says the same thing. I wish I could have stayed and gotten another 6 months of oil money. But it's that give and take. So Taylor, thank you so much for jumping in and asking those questions. Karla, so COVID-19 has definitely disrupted your market. But does your model change? How are you thinking of adapting? I know that you've added a number of different online seminars, which is pretty cool. We've tried to do the same thing, and we're seeing how that works. But is there some sort of digital co-working membership now? Like, do you change your motive to providing online value somehow, or do you become a consulting company? Like, can you give me some insight on where you think this goes?
We've broken it down to how the long-term market's going to look and how the short-term market's going to look.
Mm-hmm.
The fundamental need for co-working is not going to go away. If anything, as companies allow more people to work from home, I think it's going to increase.
Hmm.
People like the flexibility of working from home, but they also have like having a place that is not home to work.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Which is
It,
like that's a long-term market. Short-term market, very different. Which honestly, I've never seen a short-term and a long-term market so badly aligned.
yeah.
Uh, in the long term, we are launching a virtual option that's basically a mailing address,
Hmm.
a few calls a week, maybe like a few day passes if someone actually does want to come in. Uh, we're currently not taking any members
Hmm.
to safeguard to safeguard most my staff and our current members. They're all working in individual offices. Our common areas are closed, so we're not looking to add more people right now. We will in the future. Clearly, once it's safe, we're going to like come out swinging. But we are planning a sort of virtual stepping stone to a full membership that I think will
Hmm.
work after the pandemic, which is, hey, get started on filing your legal paperwork. You can use this as your mailing address. If you have a few like user network, user resources, um, we still haven't decided if it's going to be a permanent thing or a temporary thing,
Okay.
but a sort of one of the major things people keep asking for is mailing addresses.
Hmm.
Particularly in the beginning, people feel very uncomfortable putting down their house
Yeah.
where anyone can find it. So it's like, hey, here's a mailing address. We will call you when you have mail. You can come pick it up. You can have a few day passes if you want to come in and work, but not commit to a full membership.
Hmm.
And then hopefully support those people who are launching in the pandemic
Hmm.
with that, and then hopefully move them into full memberships where they can come and go and be a more active part of the community. We've considered and we've tried doing virtual co-working.
Yeah.
Um, it sort of works if there's a pre-existing relationship. If you don't know the people, it doesn't work. It's really hard to make connections online. And I do think that it's one of the reasons people join co-working spaces. It's because it is much easier to make connections just because you're around people than it is to show up to a mixer.
Hmm.
So it's kind of trying to balance that and not something we don't think would actually serve people.
Yeah.
Because we can make a digital membership sound amazing, and I think people would buy it. But I think they would very quickly realize that beyond a few certain things that we can offer in other forms anyway, they're not going to be getting the real benefit of co-working
Hmm.
out of it. So just kind of have that honest conversation of, hey, this is not an alternative. This is a baby step into when we can open back up again.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. Well, so I guess the prognosis, at least you already have an idea of where you want to go, and so things can look bright if you sort of will them to, or if things work out. Um, so if we take a bright look at things, what was your end game, or what was your mindset with co-working? Was it to have multiple locations? Was it, this was sort of a stepping stone to another completely different business? Was this something that you thought, hey, maybe I'll sell it at some point? Like what? Not that maybe you did have an exit strategy, but if you didn't, did you? What would it be now? I don't know.
The exit strategy is more.
More. Okay.
Uh, so either moving into a larger business where one of the floors can be dedicated to co-working, but still integrate the rest of the tenants
I
into the
see.
benefits of co-working while still being separate. So it's a lot easier to get your employees to go to a mixer where they can work if it's in the same building instead of having them like go search around town.
Yeah.
So kind of larger scale co-working as well as moving into other industries like construction or landscaping.
Yeah.
Uh, things where you maybe need an office and some storage, but you can probably share a few front office tasks with a few other people and basically get a little cage in a warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
And construction really is all about networking because between all the subcontractors and contractors and people get hired, and one day you're the boss and next year the person getting hired. That was one of the places we were looking to grow into. I've gotten a few calls from landlords with empty space with, hey, do you want a second location?
Mm-hmm.
So the answer is we might be growing into all three of them, and it might not all be under the same branding.
Okay.
Uh, it'll still be the same holding company, just branding specific to the industry it's going to be in.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of other industries besides B2B that are probably going to be downsizing space wise and streamlining that they can use the same ideas as co-working but tailored to their needs. Like Alamo Kitchen is basically co-working
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
food business.
Right.
The concept is the same. The logistics and carrying out of it are completely different.
Right. Yeah.
So look for other industries that are similar and may benefit from that model and kind of adapt to them.
Hmm.
Construction is one of them. We were looking at maybe doing e-commerce with flexible warehouse space
Yeah.
for people to ship out and have a nice office to work out of with a shared space. And we'll bring in speakers and do the entire shebang. So, a few industries that we're looking at growing.
But less keys, meaning like less places named Key.
Uh, honestly, we're looking for a second location right now.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Dig it.
for the next year or two, but that has a lot to do with real estate prices. Like, there's a lot of space opening up that we can
Mm-hmm.
basically walk into when it's done. I remember going through another remodel again.
That makes sense. I don't envy the amount of time that it took for you to get open. I'm sure that there were plenty of headaches within that, but as we get closer to the 11:30 mark, I want to be respectful of your time, and I'd love to know, sort of as we get to the close, what kind of leaving insight or perspectives do you think are necessary to share for people right now, for people that may watch this later, or in a couple of years or something. I mean, it could be, what do you think would be the lasting advice you think would be useful to somebody being an entrepreneur?
Um, be optimistic, but in a realistic manner. If you see an opportunity and you think you can take it, be optimistic about it. But if you look at your resources and you look at what you're doing, it's don't drag it out. Don't drag it out into a painful death.
Mm-hmm.
If if the company is not going to do well, close it down. Take a little time to mourn it because there is a lot of time and financial resources and emotional energy poured into businesses. So take the time to grieve, to mourn that you had to do it.
Yeah.
Keep looking for that second business. Um, almost all my clients are on their second or third business. And I think something that I've learned just talking to them and that I've witnessed and that I try to keep in mind is one failure pretty much defines entrepreneurship. as long as you can get up and try again, whether it's in the same business or a different one, you haven't failed yet. You've just taken a different path. So it's kind of that sort of duality between realism and optimism that you have to hold at the same time. Because yeah, there's a lot of heartache to be saved if you close down when you need to instead of dragging it out. But there's also that feeling of you can beat the odds, you're invincible, that you need to have in order to even start.
Wow. Well, that's definitely thoughtful. I mean, I can relate to a lot of those things that you're saying, and hopefully some of the folks that take a look at this will find the same value. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Karla. It means a lot. You know, I mean, you can have your 6 months with us at any point if you still want it. Happy to take you back for just the 6-month contract.
Maybe an in-kind donation.
In-kind donation. I dig it. That's funny. So, well, I appreciate it, Karla. Thank you so much. If people want to get in touch with you, or if people are interested in Key Coworking, where do they find you? Where do they find your information? How do they get in contact?
They can email me at kgarza@keycoworking.com, or look us up on Facebook, or our website is keycoworking.com. Honestly, we're like on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. If you
TikTok?
find us, just message us. We will answer.
Okay. Snapchat?
We're not on Snapchat yet, but we are considering TikTok.
Okay. That's exciting. So you heard it. Key Coworking, the key to your B2B needs. I don't know if that's I think it's close to the tagline. It may not be exactly that, but
the tagline is where small business and entrepreneurs meet, work, and grow.
Okay. Well, I totally missed it, but I won't charge you for that new tagline that I just gave you. So anyway, Karla, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Taylor, again, thank you for jumping in and providing some fresh perspective from the questions as well. I'm going to go ahead and close the recording, but thank you so much, Karla.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Karla.